Welcome to session 2 of Job. The title of the second session is The Unlikely Hope in Despair. The Unlikely Hope in Despair. But before we get into despair, I want to tell you a little true story about unseemly behavior by yours truly. First of all, I need to qualify this and tell y'all that I am at the tail end of my second season of menopause. And yes, you heard me correctly. I'm in my second season of menopause, so my hormones are about as predictable as a junior high boy on caffeine. Here's the deal. I had gone all the way through the change. I so apologize if any men are joining in via video. Y'all might want to just check the football scores for 3 or 4 minutes while I tell this story. I had gone all the way through menopause, and then I started the process of adopting Missy. And on my second trip to Haiti, how shall I say this delicately, Aunt Flo came back. And I don't think that was very delicate. Anyway, I started back into the gift from Eve. You can see why I mimic her in ugly ways, because I don't really like that gift she gave us. Anyway, when I came home, I went to my lady parts doctor and basically said, what is the deal? You know, I've been gift-free for 1.5 years, so how come all of a sudden I'm back in this flow? I'm having a hard time with euphemisms here. Anyway, my doctor said, Lisa, it's really not that unusual for middle-aged, post-menopausal women to actually kick back into regular cycles when they start the adoption process. My doctor is a believer, and he went on to say, Lisa, it's like God knows you're about to become a mama, and even though you're not going to carry a child in your own body, he knows that you're about to become a mom, so he's preparing you by raising your estrogen levels. He said, it's really a miracle. And I said, it is, in a horrible, horrible kind of way. And during this second season of giftedness, I've developed a gift that I had in part but not in full the first go around, and that is the gift of projectile perspiration. And y'all, basically I sweat like a sumo wrestler in a sauna. It's just amazing how much perspiration I can produce. So anyway, about 2 months ago, I woke up because I was in a pool of my own making, and even though it was only 5 o'clock in the morning, I thought, this is just nasty. I'm going to go ahead and get out of my little whirlpool and go to the kitchen, and maybe if I fix myself some really hot coffee, it'll trick my body into cooling down. So I go into the kitchen, make the super hot cup of coffee, and then I walk over because I thought I'm just going to sit down on the kitchen island and just savor this. And maybe I'll read some Psalms and ask Jesus to turn my thermostat down. This is just going to be a really special little devotional time. Well, as I walk over the kitchen island, I went to sit on one of these stools I just got from the Restoration Hardware outlet. And I believe the reason they were at the outlet is because they're unusually high. And it's hard for me to hoist my bottom on this stool. So when I went to hoist it up on this stool, I slipped because it's leather and I was sweaty. And when I slipped, I slammed my coffee cup down on the kitchen island, and about half the coffee spilled out, sloshed all over these papers that were on the kitchen island. And at first I thought, I've ruined some bills that I left there last night. But then as I inspected these ruined papers a little closer, I realized, oh, goodness gracious, that's Missy's homeschool assignment for the week. Because while I've been in this second season of menopause, my brain took a vacation, and I thought it would be a great idea for a single woman who travels for a living to homeschool their child who's learning English as a second language. And I thought, oh, goodness gracious, because my printer is on the fritz, and so I knew I can't download this and reprint, and this is her lesson for the week. And y'all, just like that, sin crept into my mind at that point, because I thought, oh, but I'm the principal. And I thought I can just change curriculum for the day. And so I decided, instead of studying pinnipeds, that's what we were studying, that's basically seals, instead of studying pinnipeds in the state of Maine today, we're going to go to the mall and do a little lesson on capitalism. And so when Missy woke up a few hours later, I said, baby, we're gonna get dressed. Instead of having school in the playroom today, we're going to go to the mall. And before we go to the mall, we're going to go by Starbucks because I was still jonesing for coffee. Now, I need to qualify this and say, especially for those of y'all joining us via video, I can almost promise you our baristas here in Middle Tennessee are very different than your baristas in your neck of the woods. And I'll explain that by saying we are in the middle of explosive population growth. And I believe most of the people who are currently moving to Nashville are 20-something musicians who firmly believe that if they just move to Nashville, they will get a producer and a record deal and a Grammy in short order. And when that doesn't happen in 2 or 3 months, they have to get a real job and they go work at Starbucks and are very bitter about it. And so when I pulled into Starbucks that very bad, no good, horrible, sweaty morning, I made my order in the squawk box, and I could tell the guy on the other end was one of those bitter baristas because he was just mean. And I thought, well, I'm going to try to be a missionary and you to be nice when I pull around to get my drink. Because it wasn't even a hard drink order, y'all. I ordered the same thing, winter and summer. In the winter, I order an extra hot, non-fat mocha with whipped cream because I feel like the non-fat milk and the whipped cream balance each other out. And it's kind of like a paleo drink. And in the summer, I order that same thing, but I order it iced. So it wasn't even a hard drink, but he was really grumpy about it. So I thought, well, I'm just going to spew some grace on him when I get to the window and get my drink. We pull around to the window, and because I have an SUV, I stood up high, and I can see this guy from head to toe. He kind of looks at me angrily, and then he turns to get my drink. And when he did, I noticed he was wearing crop pants. I don't know what y'all call them. Some people call them knickers, but, you know, they're pants that hit boys right there. Now, I want to make this really clear. This has nothing to do with Lifeway. I am so thrilled to actually be with Lifeway and get to do Bible studies under their mantle. So please don't send Lifeway ugly emails about this. This has nothing to do with the translation I prefer. This is all me. This is all me. In my opinion, it's purely my opinion, men over the age of, let's just say 13, who willingly, and who aren't professional golfers, who willingly choose to wear pants that hit them right there, I just think that's wrong. Everything about that is wrong. And I think if you do, as a man, choose to wear knickers or crop pants, then you have totally abdicated the right to be hateful. But this guy, he's both. He's hateful, he's wearing crop pants. He turns around, he just kind of shoves my drink to me through the window. I take it, I'm still doing my best to be a Christian. I take the drink, but when I transfer the drink from his hands to my cup holder, the lid that I now know, he purposefully did not affix correctly on top of my coffee cup. It popped off, and about half of that really hot coffee spilled in my lap. And when it did, I said a word that's not in the Bible. Now, I'm not going to tell y'all what that word was because this is a Bible study. I will tell you that it rhymed with wit. And I will also tell you that right after, within 2 weeks of me bringing Missy home from Haiti, she developed this habit of singing any new English words she learned. That's how she has learned English. She sings new words. And so as soon as I sinned and said that word, my baby began to sing it in her car seat. And Missy wove that word into what is her favorite melody this season, has been for over a year. It's Chris Tomlin's song, Good, Good Father. And so she began to sing the new word into that worship song. I dug my pit of sin even deeper, and I whirled around in the Starbucks line and said, oh, no, baby, that's not the word Mama just said. Mama said, you're a good, good coffee cup. So sit right here, sit right here. And y'all, by the time we pulled into Dillard's, I thought, I am the worst Christian mother in the history of time because it's not even lunch and my baby has skipped school, she's heard a bad word, and she has unwittingly participated in song piracy right here in the Music City. I told that story to a friend of mine who is much, much godlier, much more appropriate. And she said, I hope you never feel the need to share that story in public because some people would be mortified to know that's how Bible teachers behave. Some people would be shocked to know you did that in the Starbucks line. After a week of choir boy behavior, Job has been completely quiet. chapter 2 says, he has not sinned in anything he has said. Even though he's lost all of his children, he's lost his livelihood, he's lost his standing in the community, he is covered with sores from head to toe. His wife has already fussed at him, as we read in the study guide. I mean, he is at the lowest of lows, and he still has not sinned in what he said. He has not said any words that rhyme with whit. He has not even said darn or dadgummit. I mean, this guy has been a saint in his response to suffering until chapter 3. Chapter 3, Job erupts in what many would call shocking, unseemly behavior. Chapter 3, verse 1, again I'm reading from the CSB. After this, Job began to speak and curse the day he was born. He said, may the day I was born perish, and the night that said a boy is conceived. If only that day had turned to darkness. May God above not care about it, or light shine on it. May darkness and gloom reclaim it, and a cloud settle over it. May what darkens the day terrify it. If only darkness had taken that night away. May it not appear among the days of the year, or be listed in the calendar. Yes, may that night be barren. May no joyful shout be heard in it. Let those who curse days condemn it, those who are ready to rouse Leviathan. May its morning stars grow dark. May it wait for daylight but have none. May it not see the breaking of dawn. For that night did not shut the doors of my mother's womb and hide sorrow from my eyes. Skip to the end of chapter 3, verse 24. I sigh when food is put before me. I can't say those words have ever come out of my mouth. And my groans pour out like water, for the thing I feared has overtaken me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I cannot relax or be calm. I have no rest, for turmoil has come. Now, at first read, that may sound scandalous, but Job's outburst actually comforts me. And I'll tell you why. First of all, it's honest. And I don't know about you, but I am tired of dishonest Christians who pretend like everything's okay, but it's not. Nowhere in this book will you find God commanding us to paste a smile on when we are dying inside. I so appreciate that Job is honest about the pain he's in. A couple of years ago, I had a surgeon tell me that I was a bad patient because I was dishonest about the level of pain I was in. He said, Lisa, the fact that you will not tell me how much it hurts, and I know based on the MRI, you must be in just incredible pain. He said, the fact that you are stoic about your pain says to me you don't trust me as your healer. You put no confidence in my capacity to fix your pain because you're dishonest about it. Job is honest about his pain, thereby acknowledging the competence of his healer. I'm going to tell you where it hurts, and I'm going to tell you how bad it hurts, because you're the only one who has the remedy that I need. I also appreciate that Job's honest outburst, it illustrates the fact that there are no emotions we have to put a lid on with God. And I think sometimes we assume that God has this scale. And on one end are good emotions like joy and peace. And so he kind of blesses those emotions, and it's okay for us to express those emotions. But on the other end of the scale are negative emotions, like sorrow and confusion and even anger. And we assume God censors those emotions because certainly the church has in the past. Stick a finger in Job chapter 3, and I want you to head to the to the left, to 1 Kings chapter 19. And most of you know this story, 1 Kings chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, may the gods punish me and do so severely if I don't make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then Elijah became afraid and immediately ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba, that belonged to Judah, he left a servant there, but he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree, that would also be an acacia tree, for those of you who are familiar with the Middle East, and prayed that he might die. He said, "I've had enough. Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under the broom tree. Suddenly an angel touched him. The angel told him, "Get up and eat." Then he looked, and there at his head was a loaf of bread baked over hot stones and a jug of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord returned for a second time and touched him. He said, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." I want you to remember the context of the story in 1 Kings 19. God has just come down at Elijah's behest in the form of fire, and he has eviscerated false prophets, all the prophets of Baal. It's one of the most dramatic miracles in the Old Testament. So Elijah should be on the first leg of a victory tour. I mean, that was a huge deal. It was a definitive victory of good over evil in 1 Kings 18. But instead of starting out on this victory tour to celebrate the omnipotence, the power of Jehovah God, Elijah gets one hater Instagram message. And that one hater message from this hateful chick named Jezebel sends him into a tailspin. And instead of celebrating God's supernatural power over everything, all dominions, instead he runs out of town like a total sissy, and then he runs out of gas under an acacia tree. Now, if God were to rank our emotions in good emotions that are okay for us to express and bad emotions, that he says, put a lid on those because that might hurt my holy reputation. Surely Elijah's despondency here in 1 Kings chapter 19, God would say, buddy, you need to keep that to yourself. Like, don't be taking selfies out there under the broom tree. That is just inappropriate. You'd think that at the very least, God would chastise this exhausted prophet, but he doesn't. He does not berate this beaten down man. Instead, he sends an angel who brings a snack, and he gives Elijah 2 naps. God does not judge our all too human emotion. God accommodates human frailty. Y'all, it is not the way that we grieve that distances us from God. It's what we grieve. If you read all the way through Job chapter 3, you will see that again and again and again, Job curses the day he was born and everything about that day, but he never ever curses God. He curses everything about his life, but he never denies God. When I was studying Job, especially this part of his story, I read several commentators and historians who compared Job to the French philosopher, and many consider him to be the father of existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre. If you took philosophy in college, you will remember Sartre as an infamous atheist who really struggled with depression, as well as had a lot of commentary on communism. Anyway, there's this one very well-known quote of Sartre's that says this: "Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance." If you read much of Sartre, you'll find that he over and over and over again insists that there is no God, that we live by chance, that this world in which we live in is basically ruled by chaos. And yet that belief is also what drove Sartre to despair, because he also is quoted as saying this: that God does not exist, I cannot deny, that my whole being cries out for God. I cannot forget. Job curses the day he was born. Job emotes greatly in God's house. That's what they accused Hannah of in 1 Samuel. She emoted greatly in God's house. In other words, she was inappropriate in church. Do you think God judged her? No. No, he did not. You will never search these scriptures and find God saying, y'all need to put a lid on it. You need to just pipe down over there because that's not very seemly behavior for a follower of mine. God never says that. In fact, God encourages us to share everything that we feel. There are no good and bad emotions. There are joyful emotions and there are sad emotions. And God says, bring them to me. You come to me with your emotions. I dated a wrestler in high school and college. And he emphasized to me, Lisa, no matter how difficult the match is, don't ever go limp. Don't ever go limp in a match, because then is when it's most likely for you to be pinned by your opponent. In the context of Job, I would say, don't put a lid on it. If you've got to scream in anguish and even shake your fist at God, there is a template for that. But here's the deal, don't give up. Don't deny that God exists. Don't say, you must be so busy with all these other problems that surely you don't see me today. You can cry out in frustration. He welcomes that. Just don't deny God. I love that that's what this honesty points us to in Job chapter 3. Although, you know, there are a lot of people who have a hard time with honesty. And you see that in his friend's response. This is the first time one of Job's friends speaks. You remember from chapter 2 that Job's friends, and in a while you'll know why I refer to them as the Three Stooges, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, for 7 days, just like Job, they accompanied him on the ash heap, and they didn't say a word. They were completely quiet for 7 days, long days and nights, as Job cried and scraped his boils with pieces of broken pottery. They didn't say a word. They just sat there with him in his misery. So for a week, they were faithful. But after Job's outburst, have you ever found sometimes that it is your honesty that drives people away? I think sometimes our grief makes other people really uncomfortable. Because after Job's outburst, here's how Eliphaz, his first friend, the Temanite, replied. Job chapter 4, verse 1, then Eliphaz the Temanite replied, should anyone try to speak with you when you are exhausted, yet who can keep from speaking? Indeed, you have instructed many and have strengthened weak hands. Your words have steadied the one who was stumbling and braced the knees that were buckling. But now that this has happened to you, you have become exhausted. It strikes you and you are dismayed. Isn't your piety, your confidence, and the integrity of your life your hope? Consider who has perished when he was innocent. Where have the honest been destroyed? In my experience, those who plow injustice and those who sow trouble reap the same. They perish at a single blast from God and come to an end by the breath of his nostrils. Do you hear what Eliphaz is saying in this Hebraic poetry? You brought this on yourself. We talked about deservedness in the first session, and here's another really ugly example of it. Eliphaz is saying, you must have done something. You must have said a really bad word while waiting for coffee because you had to have brought this on yourself. We called it deservedness in session 1. The more formal phrase for that in theological circles is the law of retribution. You get what you deserve. In Middle Eastern culture, it's referred to as the philosophy of an eye for an eye. In Indian culture, it is called karma. It's the idea that if something bad happens to you, you must have brought it upon yourself. My dear friend, Eva Whittington Self, is here tonight. She knows where all the bodies are buried in my life, and she won't tell you. She knows what really should be listed as the weight on my driver's license. She won't tell you that either. She is one of the truest friends I've ever had, and I can't even express how much I respect her. We get to go to conferences around the country together sometimes, and we were at a conference a couple of years ago. And at this conference, both of us had been invited to speak on the platform. And so I came in with Eva. Eva was paralyzed in a car accident when she was in high school, and so her legs don't work. Her heart and mind run much faster than mine do, but her legs don't work. And so I was rolling her in to this women's conference because their sanctuary was up a hill. And as soon as we entered the sanctuary, one of the women on the leadership team strode over to us and said haughtily, "I have the gift of faith. So if you will allow me to pray for you, I'm sure you'll be able to get up out of that chair and walk." Now, Eva, when she was in a hit-and-run car accident, and she'll tell more of her story later, she was 17 years old, but her spine was severed. There are rods on either side of her spine to stabilize it, but it was severed. And so when this woman said, "If you'll just let me pray for you, I know you'll be able to walk," what Eva did not say is, "Well, actually, ma'am, I've been in vocational ministry for about 30 years. Thousands of people have prayed for me. And I've never been physically healed, even though God is sovereign and He could do that at this point in my life. I believe that He's actually using this wheelchair as a platform for His glory." Eva didn't say that. She is filled with grace and has been around haughty Pharisees before. So instead, she smiled kindly and said, "You know, instead of praying for my back, what I'm really struggling with right now is my anger. I've got 2 little girls and they are spicy. And so rather than praying for me to be able to walk, I feel like God is using my wheelchair for His glory. I would appreciate it if you would pray for my temper." Y'all, she might as well have waved a red flag in front of a bull. Because that woman, you could just see the indignation rise in her. And then she spit this out. This is close to verbatim. I remember it like it was yesterday. She said, "Well, if only you had more faith, you'd be able to get up out of that chair and walk." And then she turned and walked away from us. And it took every ounce of restraint I had not to tackle her. And I was just furious because I thought, where were you when Eva wanted to stand up when the pastor said, "You may now kiss your bride"? Where were you when Andrew was on a business trip and Abby or Audrey cried from their crib and Eva heard their cry and knew it would take several minutes to transfer into her chair, roll down the hall, and then make sure her infant was okay? Where in the world were you, you judgmental Jenny? And that wasn't her real name. It just was alliteration. I mean, I was so mad at this woman. Y'all, it's really, really easy to get mad at Eliphaz for being such a hooey to Job. And it's really easy to get mad at women like that who are so pharisaical. But do you know that same idea of deservedness? Do you know that the disciples had that same response? Turn to the Gospel of John. To John chapter 9. You probably remember this story. It's a short story, but boy, there is a lot of takeaway in this story. As he, Jesus, was passing by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," Jesus answered. "This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him." Sometimes I wonder if the idea of deservedness or the law of retribution or an eye for an eye or karma has lasted the test of time. Those philosophies have permeated the global consciousness for millennia. From the earliest times in biblical history to now, that is most people's assumption. If something really bad happens to you, you must have somehow brought it upon yourself. If you slip on a banana peel, then you must have left one laying in somebody else's house or else be a really bad litter bug. Lisa, if you don't have a high metabolism, it's because you say bad words in the Starbucks line. You must have somehow brought this upon yourself. Y'all, it is not at all biblical, but even the disciples thought that it was. Even the disciples said, "This blind guy must have done something really bad that he doesn't have his sight." And Jesus said, "Oh, you don't understand. He didn't sin, and neither did his parents." We have such a hard time grappling with the fact that sometimes bad things, sad things, difficult things, even torment happens to good people, happens to people of faith through no fault of their own. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. That is hard to grapple with. I think it's even harder when it lasts a long time. This past spring in May, my mother had her 80th birthday, and so Missy and I flew to Orlando to surprise her. And it was a really celebratory visit. But another visit I made alone by myself while I was in Florida that weekend was anything but celebratory. I decided to go back to the crack house where I spent a lot of time 6 years ago, because my first adoption attempt was to adopt the baby of a hardcore crack addict named Marie. And I spent the better part of her pregnancy visiting that crack house 4 years ago. I spent Christmas in that crack house. And so I went back by that crack house and I knocked on the door. And after I knocked on it for a long time, it cracked open. And a very angry man was standing there with a pit bull. And after I assured him that I was not an undercover policewoman, he swung the door open wider. And there sat Marie, this precious prostitute. I loved that young woman as much as I loved her unborn baby. And I'm not at liberty to tell you why I didn't get to bring that baby girl home. Our adoption fell apart 2 days before she was born. And I will tell you, I was devastated, absolutely devastated, even more so by the fact that I didn't just lose the baby, I lost Marie, because we had lined up a rehab facility for her to go to. We had alternative housing. We had a whole new life for her. And she chose not to take that route. And 2 days after delivering that baby, she was back out on the streets selling her body for drug money. And so when her new pimp, I found out later that's who this angry man was, when her new pimp kind of gestured to her, I was just crushed to see that she was still sitting in that same place. I'd seen her so many times before 6 years ago on that same threadbare couch that I remember. It was very obvious that she was high because her head was kind of lolling back and forth. Eyes were completely unfocused. And I said, "Hey, honey, it's me. It's Lisa." And she just kind of mumbled incoherently. And I said, "Marie, I came by to tell you I love you and to see if you needed anything." And she obviously was afraid that I was an undercover policewoman. That's happened a lot to her. And she said, "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong." And I said, "Baby, I'm not here to get you in trouble. It's Lisa. Remember? Lisa." I said, "I came by to see if you needed anything and to tell you that I loved you." And she said, "I don't remember you." And I said, "Okay." And so I turned to leave and she yelled out, she said, wait a minute, lady. Do you have any crack on you? Do you have any money? Because I really need another hit." And after I told her that I didn't, I walked to my mama's car and I drove back to my mama's house, crying the whole way. When I walked in the door of my mom's house, my Aunt Darlene was there visiting, and as soon as they saw me, they could tell that I'd been crying. My Aunt Darlene said, "What happened?" And I explained that I had been to Marie's house and what had happened. And my Aunt Darlene said, "Oh, Lisa, why did you go back there? Why did you go back to that horrible, terrible place? Why did you put yourself through that again?" And I said, "I had to, Darlene. I had to, because I still hope that one day I'll knock on the door of that crack house and Marie won't be there anymore." Y'all, grief, even when you scream it toward the heavens in an unseemly manner, grief is not the opposite of hope. In fact, grief is a sign of hope, because grief says you're still in it. Grief says you still believe that somehow, some way, a rescuer will come. Grief in the life of a believer, even grief that is hollered toward the heavens the way Job does in chapter 3. That is a sign that we still hope that somehow, some way, God will come for us and He will right what is horribly wrong in our little corner of the world. Mike Mason, who I've told you is one of my favorite commentators on Job, he puts it this way: there's a kind of despair that is realistic, courageous, and persevering in the highest degree. This is the despair that a person will have when he knows that things are wrong, that they are all wrong, and that they absolutely must get better or else he will die. The reason he despairs then is that he knows in his heart that there is a better way, and he has made up his mind that he will not rest until he finds it. He will not settle for anything less. Such a person reaches a point of staggering abandonment, being prepared to live with an inconceivable weight of sensual and psychological deprivation for the sake of holding out for deep spiritual truth. This is not despair. This is hope. It is like a spiritual hunger strike, an all-consuming protest staged against the world's complacency. A lazy and self-satisfied person will never despair in this manner. Only a person who believes ardently in God will have the courage to endure such despair. Only a person who hopes with all his heart and whose soul therefore cries out day and night to the living God for help can live with spiritual famine. If you are in a season of despair and your anguish is making other people uncomfortable, and maybe even some of those people, maybe even Christian people, are telling you that's unseemly, you need to show that you're hoping. I want you to hold this truth in your heart. Anguish and grief is not the opposite of hope. Anguish and grief is like grabbing rocks and dragging them to the beach and spelling out S-O-S. It is the stubborn belief and hope and faith that God will come for you, that He will rescue you, and that He will somehow, some way, someday make everything right. That's what He does, because He's a redeemer. Would you reach out and touch whoever you are next to, and let's pray for one another. Oh, Lord Jesus, I'm so convicted by this passage, because all too often I think it's holier for me to be stoic, to not admit where I struggle and where I have angst and questions and suffer. Thank you, thank you, thank you for this passage that proves that we don't have to put a lid on our emotions, that we can come before you in anguish, and you welcome us to come closer still. Lord, teach us what it is to be like Job, to shave our heads in bereavement and yet raise our hands in worship, never, ever, ever denying that you are there, even when we can't see the proof of your hands in our life. Amen. Yeah, this is my dear friend, more like a sister, Eva Whittington Self. We have been dear friends since I had just graduated from high school, and you're just a teensy bit older, look younger. Right. So basically, we've been friends since we both had tight skin and high metabolisms. Yeah. A long time. And when we came up with the title for this Bible study on Job, A Story of Unlikely Joy, Eva's face is one of the first pictures that appeared in my mind and heart, because I thought if there's anybody in my realm of relationships who has wreaked joy in the midst of pretty unspeakable pain, it would be Eva.
Thanks, Lisa. It's always hard. When you're with Lisa, you're going to laugh really hard and you're going to cry a whole lot as well. it really is neat that you're asking me to do it this year, because this year will be the 40th anniversary of my car accident. And so I was driving home on an old country road, and I was going around a curve, 17 years old, wasn't a great driver at all, but there was a car passing 2 other cars coming straight toward me. And I did what probably any 17-year-old would do. I slammed on brakes, which made my car start fishtailing, and the car was coming straight toward me. That car went on, and then I slid between 2 other cars that were coming, and I hit a guardrail, and then my car rolled down an embankment into the other side of a overflowing creek. And immediately, I felt pain in my back and in my sides, and I reached for my leg, and I couldn't feel anything. And I remember screaming, hitting my leg. I thought my leg had been cut off. And I remember screaming, Lord, please don't take my legs. See, I was a basketball player, I was a cheerleader, and that was my life.
They rushed you into the hospital. They put bolts around your head and a halo to stabilize your spine, put you in a striker frame. Explain what a striker frame is.
It's basically to keep you flat, straight. And so every 2 hours, you're on your stomach or your back. And so you lie on your back for 2 hours. Then they put the same kind of bed on top of you, put straps around you in order to sandwich you in. Then they flip you onto your stomach, and they take the back off. Now, the new ones aren't quite like that, but still, you're just flat.
Same concept.
Yes, for like, I want to say at least 6 weeks, I lived on the striker frame.
When you tell this next story about Mr. Ed, that's another moment that it just lodged in my heart when I read in the book of Job these 3 friends who should be comforting their brother, and instead they are so unkind, and they basically say, you brought this on yourself. And at one point in this story, Job says, you miserable comforters, because they've done such a bad job of coming alongside him and comforting him when he's in torment and agony. You had the opposite experience. You had somebody come in who was a marvelous comforter, and his name was Mr. Ed.
Yep.
Now tell that story.
When I was in the hospital, they rushed me from one hospital to the next. I'm from North Carolina, so I ended up being in the Charlotte Rehab Hospital. And while I was there, I want to say maybe a week and a half later, I was going to have surgery. Now, I thought the surgery was going to make me walk. I thought after the surgery, I was going to get my feeling back in my legs. And so the doctor came in to explain the surgery to me, and he explained how they were going to fuse my spine back together, how they were going to take 2 steel rods and put them on each side of my spine in order to stabilize it. And then he asked me if I had any questions, and this 17-year-old girl only had one question. When will I be walking again? When will I get my feeling back in my legs? And he said, never. Eva, you will never, ever walk again. And so the doctor walked out of the room, and the nurses came in, and they flipped me onto my stomach. And I was just staring at the floor. And I remember just screaming out to God. I just remember crying and asking why. And then I believe that the Lord met me right where I was. I think he met me in my confusion. I think he met me in my anger. And I think he gave me permission to tell him what I was feeling. And so I did.
How much it hurt.
Yes. And I found out he can handle all that.
Yeah.
And then the Lord went a step further, and he sent Mr. Ed into the room. There was a knock at the door, and this man came in. His name is Ed Hall. He's a minister. He wasn't my pastor, but he was my friend. And so he came into the room, and he asked me how I was doing. And I said, I told him what the doctor just told me, that I'd never walk again. And that big man that day, he still had his suit on. And I remember he stretched out on that floor underneath that striker frame. And he reached up and he held my hand and he cried with me. He didn't quote any scripture. He didn't explain any theology. He just hurt with me. And that was what I needed.